A garden, lush and unblemished, yet dense with something more than life, an invisible tension woven into the roots and branches. At its heart stand two trees, one offering life without end, the other something far more dangerous: awareness. The serpent doesn't slither in as an agent of chaos, but as a whisper of possibility. Not a deceiver, but a catalyst. What if it wasn't the bringer of ruin, but the one who dared to offer humanity its first true choice? Not between good and evil, but between comfort in ignorance and the sharp, unrelenting clarity of knowledge. Across time, the serpent coils itself around the foundations of countless cultures. In Sumer, it guards sacred secrets. In Greece, it becomes a symbol of healing and rebirth, entwined on the staff of Asclepius. In Gnostic texts, it's no longer the villain, but the voice of a higher truth, challenging the very authority that branded it as evil. This isn't just about Eden, it's about how stories are shaped, how symbols are twisted, and how those who control knowledge often decide who wears the mask of the monster. Perhaps the serpent's true sin wasn't in offering the fruit, but in revealing that wisdom was never forbidden, only feared. The story begins in Eden, a garden not just of beauty, but of boundaries, a place stitched with divine intention, where rivers carve through fertile ground and the breath of God lingers in the spaces between leaves. Here, Adam and Eve live untouched by time, wrapped in innocence, their only command clear and absolute: eat from any tree, but not from the one that bears the knowledge of good and evil. Enter the serpent, not the grotesque villain of medieval art, but a creature described simply as more subtle than any beast of the field. It speaks, not with threats, but with a question, a suggestion that flickers like a match struck in the dark. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Eve listens. The fruit gleams with an impossible allure, not just for its taste, but for what it promises: wisdom. The serpent doesn't coerce, it reveals a possibility. And so Eve eats. Adam follows, their eyes open, not with the soft glow of enlightenment, but with the harsh glare of self-awareness. Nakedness, once meaningless, now feels like exposure. They cover themselves with fig leaves, fragile armor against a new world that suddenly seems sharper, colder. God returns, walking in the cool of the day, and what was once perfect harmony fractures. The punishment is swift, etched into the human condition: pain in childbirth, toil in labor, exile from paradise. The serpent is cursed to crawl on its belly, destined to be at war with humanity forever. This moment, this bite, becomes known as the fall. In mainstream Christian theology, the serpent is more than just a clever animal. Over centuries, it morphs into something far more sinister. An incarnation of Satan himself, the adversary lurking beneath every temptation. This interpretation crystallizes in the writings of early church fathers like Augustine of Hippo, who links the serpent to the devil's rebellion against God, framing Eden as the first battlefield in an eternal war for human souls. Art and literature echo this portrayal. Milton's Paradise Lost envisions Satan not just as the deceiver of Eve, but as the architect of humanity's ruin, a fallen angel twisting his way into creation's perfect garden. In cathedrals and stained glass, the serpent coils, a warning etched in colour and stone. Beware the whisper that leads to ruin. But stories, like symbols, shift with time, and sometimes what's cast as evil in one light reveals something different when seen from another angle. Perhaps the serpent's role wasn't about deception, but about daring humanity to awaken, to question, to seek, to know. The serpent story didn't begin or end in Eden. Long before it was cast as the villain, it slithered through the mythologies of ancient civilizations, not as an agent of evil, but as a symbol woven into the very fabric of life, death, and what lies beyond. In ancient Egypt, the serpent rose with the sun itself. The uraeus, a rearing cobra crowned with the disk of Ra, was emblazoned on the headdresses of pharaohs, not as a warning, but as a mark of divine authority. It wasn't hidden in shame, it was displayed boldly, its flared hood a symbol of sovereignty, protection, and the living power of the gods. The uraeus was believed to spit fire at the enemies of the pharaoh, a guardian as much as a symbol. And yet serpents weren't only protectors. In the underworld, the serpent Apep writhed in endless battle against Ra, embodying chaos. But even Apep wasn't pure evil. He was necessary, the darkness that gave meaning to light, the eternal struggle that kept the cosmic balance. Further north, in the fractured echoes of Greek mythology, the serpent coils into a circle, devouring its own tail. This is the Ouroboros, a symbol not of hunger but of wholeness, the eternal cycle where life feeds on death and endings are indistinguishable from beginnings. It appeared in the ancient Greek magical texts and found its way into the Chrysopoeia of Cleopatra, an alchemical manuscript where the Ouroboros cradles the words, "One is the all." The serpent here isn't a deceiver, but a teacher, illustrating the endless loop of creation, destruction, and rebirth. A lesson in the unity of opposites, not their division. In the shadowed realms of Norse mythology, the serpent takes on a monstrous form. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, so vast it encircles the world, biting its own tail, holding the seas in place. Jormungandr is both a threat and a necessity. It is said that when it releases its grip, Ragnarok, the end of the world, will begin. But Ragnarok isn't just an apocalypse. It's a cleansing, a transformation, after which the world will be born anew. Jormungandr isn't merely an agent of chaos. It is the pulse of inevitable change, a force that ensures the world does not stagnate. Across these ancient cultures, the serpent slithers through the cracks in our understanding, not as a simple villain but as something far more complicated. A symbol of rebirth, transformation, wisdom, and the delicate balance between creation and destruction. It sheds its skin, emerging renewed, an ancient metaphor for growth and metamorphosis. The question isn't why the serpent was vilified in later traditions. The real mystery is how something once sacred, once crowned and revered, became the embodiment of deceit. Perhaps the serpent didn't change. Perhaps it's the story that did. But the serpent's transformation from sacred to sinister didn't happen in isolation. There were those who refused to accept the rewritten script. Early Christian mystics known as the Gnostics, whose beliefs flickered like forbidden candles in the dark corners of orthodoxy. To them, the story of Eden wasn't about the fall of man. It was about an escape. Gnosticism, born in the shadowed centuries after Christ's death, wasn't a single doctrine but a constellation of beliefs orbiting one central idea, that knowledge, gnosis, was the key to salvation. Not blind faith, not obedience, but the awakening of the soul through direct personal insight. Where Orthodox Christianity preached sin and redemption, Gnosticism whispered of hidden truths, layered beneath the surface of sacred texts like riddles waiting to be solved. In these forbidden gospels, like the Apocryphon of John, the serpent isn't the deceiver, it's the liberator. The garden isn't a paradise, it's a prison crafted not by the benevolent god of light but by an impostor. The demiurge, a lesser, arrogant deity who crafted the material world as a gilded cage. The demiurge parades himself as the ultimate creator, blinding humanity to the true divine source that exists beyond him, vast and unknowable. The serpent's role? To crack that illusion, to plant a seed of defiance in the minds of Adam and Eve. When it whispers to Eve, it isn't spinning lies. It's offering a key. The fruit isn't poisoned. It's the antidote. A cure for the ignorance imposed by a false god who demanded worship without question. In taking the fruit, Eve doesn't doom humanity. She awakens it. Some Gnostic sects even revered Eve as the first seeker of truth, the original Gnostic. courageous enough to reach beyond imposed limits. She isn't a tragic figure, shamed and blamed. She's a heroine, the one who dared to challenge divine authority in pursuit of wisdom. In texts like the hypostasis of the Archons, Eve is portrayed as having a divine spark, a fragment of the true God's essence, hidden within her, beyond the reach of the demiurge's control. In this reimagining, the Serpent and Eve are co-conspirators in humanity's awakening. The garden wasn't lost. It was left behind, outgrown. The fall was never a fall at all, but a necessary step toward self-awareness, an ascent disguised as exile. Gnostic texts were buried both literally and metaphorically, hidden in desert caves at places like Nag Hammadi, their fragile pages waiting centuries to be uncovered. When they finally resurfaced in the 20th century, they revealed not just alternative gospels, but an entirely different lens through which to view the oldest story ever told. Maybe the serpent was never the villain. Maybe the real crime was daring to know. But the serpent's story doesn't just slither through sacred texts and forgotten gospels. It coils deeper, into the very architecture of the human mind. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who spent his life mapping the shadowy corridors of the psyche, saw the serpent not as a creature of sin or salvation, but as a symbol rooted in something far older than religion, the unconscious mind itself. For Jung, the serpent wasn't just a figure in a myth. It was an archetype, a universal symbol embedded in the collective unconscious, a kind of psychic inheritance shared across cultures and ages. Its presence in so many ancient stories wasn't coincidence. It was a reflection of something primal, something woven into the very fabric of human experience. The serpent, Jung suggested, represents the instinctual forces within us, the raw, coiled potential that lies beneath the polished surface of consciousness. It is both creative and destructive, embodying life's endless cycle of death and rebirth, growth and decay. In dreams, the serpent often appears when a person stands on the brink of transformation, shedding an old skin to reveal something new beneath. And what of the forbidden fruit? To Jung, it was never just about disobedience. The fruit is a metaphor for consciousness itself, the bite that divides innocence from awareness. The moment a person steps beyond the boundaries imposed by others to face the terrifying freedom of self-knowledge. It is the spark of individuation, the process Jung described as the journey toward becoming one's true self. Unbound by the roles and rules handed down by society, religion, or even one's own fears, the serpent in Eden wasn't whispering evil. It was offering a choice, to remain in the comfort of ignorance or to embrace the painful, exhilarating burden of enlightenment. And that choice, the tension between staying asleep or waking up, echoes through every human life. It's the voice that questions authority, challenges dogma, and asks, is this all there is? Good and evil are too small, too brittle to contain the serpent's meaning. It's not about morality, it's about transformation, about the terrifying beauty of growth. Because to grow, something old must die, an idea, a belief, an identity. The serpent knows this. That's why it sheds its skin, leaving behind what no longer serves, unafraid to emerge raw and new. Maybe that's why the serpent unnerves us, not because it deceives, but because it tells the truth. Not because it leads us astray, but because it dares us to look inward and find there, coiled in the shadows, the parts of ourselves we fear to name. But symbols are fragile things. They can be reshaped, repurposed, weaponized. The serpent, once a figure of wisdom and transformation, found itself coiled in a new role, not by accident, but by design. As Christianity evolved from a scattered collection of spiritual movements into an organized institution, the story needed villains, and the serpent fit the role perfectly. In the chaotic early centuries after Christ's death, there wasn't one Christianity. There were many. Gnostic sects, mystery cults, and divergent communities all interpreted the teachings in their own ways. Some saw Christ not as a savior from sin, but as a revealer of hidden knowledge. In texts like the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus speaks in riddles and parables, urging seekers to find the kingdom of God within themselves, not in temples, not in laws, but in direct, personal awakening. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene goes even further, presenting Mary not as a repentant sinner, but as a disciple who understands Christ's message more deeply than the others, challenging the emerging orthodox hierarchy. But knowledge, especially the kind that bypasses authority, is dangerous to those who build their power on obedience. The early church, as it grew from persecuted sect to imperial religion, needed clarity, order, and control. The wild, untamed diversity of Gnostic thought was a threat. So, a shift began, not just in theology, but in storytelling. The serpent, once a bearer of wisdom, became the embodiment of deception. Augustine of Hippo, one of Christianity's most influential thinkers, framed original sin not just as disobedience, but as a hereditary stain passed through generations, rooted in Eve's encounter with the serpent. This interpretation tightened the Church's grip, casting humanity as inherently flawed and dependent on the Church's sacraments for salvation. In this new narrative, the serpent's crime wasn't just tempting Eve, it was offering knowledge without permission. The forbidden fruit became a symbol not of awakening, but of rebellion against divine, and by extension ecclesiastical authority. Meanwhile, texts that told a different story were hidden, banned, or declared heretical. The Gnostic Gospels, lost to the sands of Egypt, weren't rediscovered until 1945 in the Nag Hammadi Library, their fragile pages sealed in clay jars, untouched for over 1,000 years. They spoke of a Christianity that didn't fear the serpent, but embraced the quest for knowledge it represented. But by then, the story had been set in stone, literally carved into cathedrals, painted onto ceilings, and preached from pulpits. The serpent, once a guide through the mysteries of existence, was now chained to the idea of sin. And perhaps that's the greatest trick of all, not that the serpent deceived humanity, but that humanity was taught to fear the very thing that could set them free. The serpent has slithered through history, shedding skins, shifting shapes, from sacred guardian to tempter, from symbol of wisdom to the face of sin itself. But maybe the question isn't who or what the serpent is. Maybe the question is why the story was told this way at all. Was the serpent in Eden really evil? Or was it humanity's first symbol of forbidden knowledge, daring us to reach beyond the comfortable, the known, the safe? Perhaps the serpent didn't offer damnation. Perhaps it offered a choice, the terrifying, beautiful burden of self-awareness. Is the serpent a villain, a deceiver, or a misunderstood guide offering the fruit of wisdom to those brave enough to take it?